Montana Territory, 1877. The wind howled through the Bitterroot Mountains as Naomi Alder stood barefoot in the snow, blood fresh on her lip and nothing but a threadbare shawl wrapped around her shoulders. They had said she was nothing. Her husband's family, the town, even the preacher who had stood at the pulpit and told her God favored obedience. They said she had nothing to offer, nothing to say, nothing worth keeping. And when her husband died in a saloon brawl last spring, they left her and her 2 children with an empty house and a pile of debts. She had tried to stay, tried to work the land herself, to feed her son and daughter with calloused hands and cracked nails. But the land was hard, and winter harder. Last week, the last of the cornmeal was gone. 3 days ago, she had traded her boots for 2 sacks of flour. Yesterday, the sheriff came with a paper that said the land was no longer hers. So she walked, with Rosie and Reuben bundled in rags behind her, their cheeks raw from the cold. They had walked 2 days. She had no plan, only the hope that somewhere, someone would not look at her like she was broken glass. The snow had started falling again when the first gunshot rang out. Naomi dropped to her knees, pulling the children close as hooves thundered through the trees. She turned, heart hammering, and saw a man burst through the pines on a buckskin gelding, rifle drawn, eyes sharp. "Get behind me," he shouted, dismounting fast. A second shot cracked. He fired into the trees, once, then again. Silence fell. Then the man turned, kneeling beside her. "You hurt?" he asked, voice low, steady. Naomi shook her head. Rosie clung to her skirts. Reuben peeked from beneath her shawl. "They were trying to rob us," she managed to say, her voice rough from cold and days without rest. "Yeah," the man muttered, glancing toward the woods. "Saw him trailing you a mile back. Not the first time they've come after folks." He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders without asking. It was worn but warm, and it smelled of pine smoke and horses. "You got a name?" he asked. "Naomi," she said. "Naomi Alder. These are my children. Rosie's 6. Reuben just turned 4. He looked down at the kids. Rosie's small face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. Reuben clutched a ragged doll in one mittened hand. "I'm Cassian Ward," he said, standing. "My place is about a mile east. You're coming with me." She hesitated. I ain't asking," he said, voice firm but not unkind. "You and those kids won't survive another night out here." He helped her up. Reuben whimpered, and Cassian bent down, lifting the boy in one arm like he weighed nothing. Rosie took Naomi's hand. They followed him through the snow, Cassian leading the horse by the reins. His cabin sat at the edge of a frozen creek. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, it was warm, lit by oil lamps and the glow of a fire. He set Reuben down gently, then brought in blankets, a kettle of stew, and dry socks for all 3 of them. Naomi ate slowly, watching him. There was a quietness to him, not the cold kind, but the kind that came from spending a lot of time alone. He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. He just moved around the cabin with quiet purpose, setting out food, offering comfort without words. Later, when the children were asleep in the loft, Naomi sat near the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of tea. "You got people?" Cassian asked, his voice low. "No," she said. "My husband's people said I was a burden. My own folks died back east when I was 15. He nodded, eyes on the fire. "And your man?" "Drunk himself into an early grave," she said flatly. "He hit more than he hugged. But folks still called me ungrateful when I left his name behind." Cassian looked at her then. Really looked. "You are not nothing," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I said you are not nothing, Naomi Alder. I do not know who told you that, but they were wrong." Her throat tightened. She looked away. "You do not even know me. I know you walked 2 days in the snow to keep your children alive. I know you stepped between them and a gun. That's enough for me." She stared at the fire for a long time. Her hands trembled in her lap, and when he reached over and laid his hand gently over hers, she did not pull away. "You can stay here," he said, "as long as you need." She nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, she lay on a cot near the fire while her children slept above. Cassian had taken the floor across the room, but she could hear his breathing. Steady. Safe. For the first time in months, she closed her eyes without fear. The next morning, Naomi woke to the smell of bacon. The children were laughing softly upstairs. She sat up, confused by the warmth in her chest. It was not just the fire, it was something else. Something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Cassian stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, humming low under his breath. When he turned and saw her awake, he gave a short nod. Coffee's hot. I made biscuits. She rose slowly, still wrapped in his coat. She moved to the table, and he poured her a cup. Thank you, she said. You are welcome. Naomi took a sip, then another. Her hands were still rough, her hair still tangled. But when Cassian met her eyes across the table, something in her chest eased. He did not look at her like she was a burden. He looked at her like she mattered. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to see it. With him. The wind eased by late morning, but the cold held fast. Naomi hung Reuben's damp socks by the hearth and glanced toward the loft. Rosie was helping Cassian stack kindling near the wood bin, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, her braid falling forward over one shoulder. Cassian handed her a small hatchet and showed her how to split the thinner twigs with the grain, one steady tap at a time. You ever learn your letters? He asked her, setting down a bundle of cedar. Some, Rosie said. Mama taught me the ones in my name. R and O and S. That's a good start, he said. I've got an old primer here somewhere. We can read through it after supper, if you like. Rosie nodded, her face set with quiet determination. Naomi turned away, unsure how to carry the weight swelling in her chest. She stirred the pot on the stove, though it didn't need stirring. The cabin was no palace, but every corner held something useful. Hooks carved from elk antler lined the walls. A saddle hung from a peg above a worn bench. The only decoration was a framed sketch of a hawk in flight, inked in careful lines on yellowed paper. You draw that? She asked as Cassian crossed the room. My sister did, he said. Long time ago, before she married a farrier in Missoula. She had a talent for things that flew. Naomi watched the drawing a moment longer. It's beautiful. She'd like to hear you say that. He pulled a chair from the corner and sat near the stove, stretching his legs out, hands resting loose over his knees. The firelight caught in the stubble along his jaw. There's a schoolhouse about 10 miles south, he said. Small, but the teacher's fair. I help haul wood there during the fall. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. I never thought about school. We were always moving or making do. Well, he said slowly, you're not moving now. She looked over at him. He didn't press further. Just let the words settle between them. That afternoon, Reuben fell asleep with his cheek against Cassian's shoulder while Naomi mended a tear in Rosie's sleeve. Outside, sleet pattered against the windows. The sound was soft, almost soothing. You got work here? Naomi asked, nodding her thread. I trap and guide when the season's right. Keep a few hens behind the shed. There's a smokehouse out back, and the creek's got good trout come spring. She nodded, keeping her hands busy. You live here alone? Since my father passed, he said. He built this place after the war. Wasn't much at first, just a roof and 4 walls. But he always said a man could build something better out of what's broken, if he had patience. Naomi paused, needle balanced between her fingers. Did he? Cassian's gaze met hers. He tried. I reckon that counts. The quiet stretched again, but it wasn't heavy. She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. Rosie and Reuben, she said. They're everything I have. He nodded. They're good kids. Don't need much to see that. They've gone without more than I care to admit. He didn't offer comfort, just held her gaze, steady and unflinching. They won't go without here. Outside, the sleet turned to snow again, thin and drifting. Naomi lit the lantern while Cassian settled Reuben by the fire, tucking a wool blanket around his small frame. Later, while Rosie practiced her letters at the table, Naomi stepped out back to check the henhouse. The snow muted everything, and the sky was a soft, washed gray. She moved slowly, boots crunching over the packed ground. Her hands ached from the cold, but when she opened the coop and found 3 eggs nestled in straw, something inside her lifted. She returned to the cabin and held them out. They're still laying. Cassian smiled with his eyes more than his mouth. Hens don't care about snow, just need to be fed regular. I'll tend them, she said. You've given us a roof. I can pull my weight. He stood and took a step closer, his voice low. I've no doubt about that. She didn't look away. Rosie called from the table. Mama, what's this one? Naomi turned, walking over to sit beside her. That's A.W., she said, tracing it with her finger. Looks like two hills sitting side by side. Cassian leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. He watched them, something thoughtful in his gaze, but said nothing. As dusk settled, Naomi ladled stew into bowls. They ate together, the fire crackling soft behind them. Rosie and Reuben curled up in the loft early, worn out from the day. Cassian took 2 mugs from the shelf and poured the last of the coffee. He handed one to Naomi and sat beside her near the hearth. "You thinking of settlin'?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, fingers wrapped around the mug. "I've never had a say in stayin' before." "You do now?" She looked at him, the firelight brushing his cheek. "Why are you doing this?" His brow furrowed slightly. "Because somewhere along the way, folks forgot how to care for each other. I don't aim to be one of them." Naomi stared into the flames, then back at him. "If I stayed, I'd want to earn it. You already have." He didn't reach for her, didn't crowd her space. But the way he said it quiet, sure left no room for doubt. She set her mug down and stood. "I'll see to the wash in the morning." Cassian nodded once, rising with her. "I'll clear the path before first light." She paused before climbing the ladder to the loft. "Good night, Cassian." He met her gaze. "Good night, Naomi." She carried the warmth of his voice with her as she lay beside her children, the storm outside no longer something to fear. The creek had started to thaw, thin ribbons of water trickling between crusted banks of snow. Naomi stood at its edge with her skirts pinned up, sleeves rolled to the elbow as she scrubbed Reuben's trousers against a flat stone. Her fingers were stiff, but the ache didn't bother her. Not like it used to. Behind her, Rosie sat cross-legged with a basket of mending, threading neat stitches into the hem of a flour sack apron. Cassian had shown her how to cut it to fit. Naomi had watched them together, quiet and careful, as Rosie asked questions and he answered them without a trace of impatience. There was a steadiness in the way he treated her children, not like burdens to be tolerated, but like people worth listening to. Naomi wrung out the trousers and laid them over a branch to dry. The wind slid cold through the trees, but the sun held a faint promise of spring. Cassian was working behind the barn, splitting fence rails. She could hear the rhythm of the axe, even and deliberate. He'd offered her a place in the work early on, not as charity, but as partnership. She cleaned and cooked, tended the hens, kept the cabin in order. He never weighed her usefulness aloud, but his actions made it plain. She belonged here, not as a guest, but as someone who had a right to shape the life being built. As the last of the wash dripped on the line, she heard the gate creak open. Cassian's voice followed, low and steady. "You've come far, Mr. Avery. What brings you out this way?" Naomi turned, drying her hands on her apron as a man on a tall roan horse dismounted. He was older, with a neatly trimmed beard and a hat banded in silver conchos. His coat bore dust from the road, and his boots had the polish of town life. "Looking for a woman and 2 children," the man said. "Name's Alder. You heard of them?" Naomi stepped forward before Cassian could answer. "Why?" Avery took her in with a single glance. "Name's Luther Avery. I'm a magistrate out of Stevensville. Your late husband owed a considerable sum to a merchant named Danner. He's filed a claim on the debt." "I don't have anything left," Naomi said, voice steady. "That land's gone. So's the mule. I gave up what little I could to settle accounts." "Danner's not after property," Avery said. "He's after custody." Cassian's axe dropped into the snow behind him. Naomi took a slow breath. "Explain." "Danner's filed a petition citing abandonment and destitution. Claims he can provide your children with a stable home. He's offering to take them in until they're of age." "They're mine," she said, every word carved from stone. "I'm not here to enforce it," Avery said, raising a hand. "Only to deliver notice. You've got until the circuit judge rides through in May. You'll need to appear." Naomi's jaw clenched. "He never even looked at them when my husband was alive." "Why now?" Avery looked uncomfortable. "I can't speak to motive. Just the law." Cassian stepped forward, his voice measured. "She'll be there, and she won't be standing alone." Avery gave a slow nod, then mounted up. "I'll make note of that." After he rode off, Naomi stood in the silence, her breath ragged. Cassian didn't touch her, just waited. "I won't let them take my children," she said. "They won't," he replied. She turned to him then. "They'll call me unfit. Say I've got no land, no husband, no claim." "You've got shelter," he said. "Food. Proof you're raising them with care. And if it's a husband they want, he continued, voice low and even, that can be arranged. Naomi stared at him. He didn't flinch. I'm not saying it because I feel sorry for you, or because it's the easiest way to keep them here. I'm saying it because I've watched you these past weeks, and I know what kind of woman you are. She crossed her arms. You don't know everything. No, he said, but I know enough, and I've got no fear of spending the next 30 years learning the rest. Naomi's throat tightened. She looked toward the cabin, where Rosie was folding the last of the mending and Reuben sat drawing in the ashes with a stick. I never thought I'd be given anything real, she said. Not after all I've come through. This ain't a gift, he said. It's a life. One we'll build together, if you want it. The wind stirred her hair. The creek murmured behind her. For the first time, her heart didn't brace for disappointment. I do, she said, voice clear. I want it. Cassian extended his hand, not to pull her, but to walk beside her back toward the house. She reached for it. Their fingers laced together, steady and sure. Inside, the hearth still burned warm. The table was set for supper. And for the first time in her life, Naomi Alder walked into a home that was truly hers. The morning of the wedding came quiet and clear, with frost laid thin across the fields and a pale blue sky stretched wide above the valley. Naomi stood near the stove, her hands wrapped around a basin of warm water as she washed Reuben's face. He blinked up at her, drowsy and content, and leaned into her touch. Cassian had gone to the neighboring homestead before sunrise. He hadn't said much, just kissed the top of Rosie's head and told Naomi he'd be back before midday with the Reverend. Naomi dried Reuben's cheeks with the corner of her work apron. His curls were damp from sleep, and his shirt was one Cassian had mended the week before, the patches neat and even. Rosie stood at the cabin's only mirror, brushing her hair with careful strokes. Naomi had sewn a simple blue ribbon into the collar of her dress, and it peeked out like a promise. You look like spring, Naomi said softly. Rosie turned, her face bright. So do you. Naomi smiled faintly, then reached for the dress she'd laid over the rocker. It was the only one she owned that wasn't patched or faded beyond repair. She'd hemmed it 2 days earlier with a strip of calico from a bundle Cassian had traded for. The sleeves still sat a little crooked, but they held. She changed behind the curtain, her hands steady as she fastened the buttons. The fabric was snug across her ribs, but the weight of it felt right. Honest, like she wasn't hiding anymore. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cedar and thawing earth. The hens clucked lazily near the fence, pecking at the straw Cassian had scattered the night before. When the wagon rolled up just past noon, Rosie tugged Reuben out onto the porch, their boots thudding against the boards. Naomi stepped out behind them, her hands clasped at her waist. Cassian climbed down first, his coat brushed clean, a fresh shirt beneath. He nodded once at her, then turned to help the Reverend down. The man was tall and lean, with hands that looked more used to holding a plow than a Bible. Afternoon, Miss Alder, he said, stepping forward. Mr. Ward says you'd like me to marry you. Yes, she answered, her voice firm. We would. The Reverend looked between the two of them, then at the children. You have witnesses? Rosie raised her hand. I can be one. Reuben mimicked her, his little arms shooting upward. The Reverend chuckled, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Well then, let's not keep the day waiting. They stood beneath the cottonwood beside the cabin, where the earth was soft and dark. Cassian took Naomi's hand in both of his eyes never leaving hers. You got anything you want to say? The Reverend asked. Naomi swallowed, then nodded. I used to think love was something I didn't get to keep, that it came for other women with prettier lives and softer pasts. But then I came here, and I saw what it meant to be held steady not with words, but with actions. I don't need a grand promise. Just this. You. Us. Cassian's grip tightened slightly, his thumb brushing the side of her wrist. I got nothing clever, he said. Only this truth. I'll stand beside you, come whatever comes. You and the children. You're my home now. The Reverend cleared his throat. By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I declare you joined. You may seal it as you see fit. Cassian leaned forward and kissed her, slow and certain. Not shy, not rushed, just right. Reuben clapped. Rosie grinned so wide it nearly split her face. That night, After the children had fallen asleep in the loft, Rosie curled with her braid draped over Reuben's arm. Both of them worn from the day Naomi stood by the window, watching the moon rise over the trees. Cassian came up behind her, close but not pressing. His hand settled lightly on her waist. "You tired?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "Not yet." "Cold?" She shook her head. "I'm warm." He turned her gently, his palm resting against her lower back. "I've never done this before," she whispered. "Not like this. With choice. With trust." Cassian nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "We take it one day at a time. That's all we need." She leaned into him then, her cheek resting against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long while, the fire crackling low, the smell of pine smoke and wool hanging in the air. Later, in the quiet of their room, Naomi lay beside him beneath the quilt she'd pieced together that first week in the cabin. The seams weren't even, but they held. Cassian reached for her hand beneath the covers, his fingers closing around hers. She traced the line of his knuckles with her thumb, her voice barely a breath. "They told me I was nothing." He turned his head, eyes steady in the dark. They lied. And in that silence, with the weight of his hand in hers and the sound of her children breathing just above, Naomi knew she would never be nothing again. The days lengthened with the coming of spring, and the land began to soften beneath the thaw. Naomi planted early greens in the beds Cassian had cleared near the edge of the field, her fingers working the soil with steady care. Rosie helped, her small hands eager to press seeds into the dark earth, while Reuben chased the hens with a stick he'd carved into the shape of a sword. Cassian built a new gate for the garden, using iron nails he'd traded for in town and pine planks from a tree felled the previous autumn. Naomi watched him from the porch as she peeled potatoes, the blade of her knife clicking softly against the tin bowl. He worked without rush, but with purpose, each piece measured, each strike deliberate. She'd taken to sitting outside in the evenings once the supper dishes were cleaned and the children tucked in. Sometimes Cassian joined her, sometimes he stayed behind, finishing one quiet task or another. But she always heard his steps when he came, the creak of the porch board beneath his heel, the way he settled beside her without needing to speak first. One night, after the last frost, he brought out a folded scrap of paper and handed it to her without explanation. She opened it carefully, smoothing the edges with her palm. It was a deed. Her name, written in ink across the top, the cabin and the land beneath it listed below. "I don't understand," she said. "You're my wife," he said. "But your name deserves to stand on paper same as mine. This land's yours as much as mine now. I already filed it with the clerk." She looked at him, the weight of it settling in her chest, not heavy, but solid. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I did it." The wind moved through the trees behind them. Naomi folded the deed and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. "Thank you," she said quietly. He reached over, lacing his fingers through hers. "You built a life beside me. That means something." They sat together until the sky turned dark, the stars pale and scattered. When May came, they rode to Stevensville with both children bundled in the wagon bed. The town was busy with traders and farmers, and Naomi kept one hand on Reuben's shoulder as they walked the dirt street toward the courthouse. She felt the looks, the murmurs behind gloved hands, some familiar faces from the past, some strangers. But none of it mattered. Inside, the judge listened as Naomi presented her records: schooling for Rosie, vaccinations for Reuben, the deed in her name, the proof of a marriage solemnized by witness and law. Cassian stood beside her, calm and composed, offering only what was needed. When the judge handed down his ruling, the words felt like a stone lifted from her chest. The petition for custody withdrawn, the children remaining in her care without contest. They left town by mid-afternoon. As the wagon rolled past the last cluster of buildings, Naomi looked over at Cassian. "I never thought I'd be able to stand in front of a judge and not be afraid," she said. "You didn't just stand," he said. "You stood tall." That night, back at the homestead, Rosie laid a bunch of wild primrose on the table. "For Mama," she said, "for being brave." Naomi knelt, pulling her close. "You two are the reason I can be." Reuben tapped her knee. "Does this mean we don't have to go anywhere?" She kissed the top of his head. "It means we're home." Summer settled in slow, like a hand smoothing across a warm quilt. Naomi and Cassian worked the land together, planting beans and squash, mending the roof, and tending to the hens that had begun laying again in earnest. Rosie learned to write her name in full, and Reuben took to shadowing Cassian across the yard, pretending to measure fence lines with a broken compass. One evening, Naomi brought out a jar of preserves she'd been saving since the spring before last. They ate it with biscuits on the porch, the last of the sun painting the sky in gold and rose. The children fell asleep against each other on the step, their heads touching. Cassian pulled a blanket from inside and draped it over them. Then he turned to Naomi, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," he said. "That the quiet suited me." She tilted her head, watching him. "And now I know the quiet only meant I hadn't found you yet." She leaned forward and kissed him, slow and sure, her hands resting at the collar of his shirt. When she pulled back, her voice was soft. "I want to grow old here. With you." "You will," he said. "We all will." He took her hand and led her inside. The door left slightly ajar so the evening breeze could drift in. They moved through the house they had built into a home, every shelf and corner shaped by their efforts, their love. The walls bore the scent of pine and flower and lamp oil, the sounds of laughter and footsteps and breath. That night, they lay together in the hush of their room, the quilt tucked around them, their hands linked beneath it. In the seasons that followed, the children grew strong and steady. Rosie began helping Naomi with the baking, her fingers deft with kneading. Reuben learned to fish with Cassian, his shouts echoing across the creek when he caught his first trout. The garden flourished, and Naomi dried herbs to hang above the stove, her movements sure and practiced. Neighbors came by more often, some bringing seed, some seeking advice, and Naomi welcomed them with warm bread and a steady voice. Cassian built a second shed behind the barn. He said it was for tools, but Naomi knew he was planning for more than that, for a life that kept expanding. As the years passed, the love between them deepened, not with grand declarations, but in the way he held her waist when the wind blew strong, and the way she pressed his shirt flat each morning before he stepped outside. They stood together through storm and sun, through sickness and harvest, bound not by circumstance, but by the steady choice to keep walking side by side. And when the years turned gray at their temples and the children grew taller than the porch rail, Naomi would still reach for his hand each evening, and he would still offer it without hesitation. Because what they had was not loud, not fleeting, it was built, tenderly and without hurry, from the quiet strength of two people who had endured and who had chosen, every day, to love.